Press microphone on. The 3 minutes will come up on the screen on the bottom left-hand side. When you finish speaking, just one in the middle. One. when the minutes come up.
Good evening, everybody, and it's very pleasant. Good evening. It's very pleasant to be back in this chair. I first occupied 30 years ago, believe it or not, but this is my last year because I'm not standing for election next year.
Welcome back, Chair. You don't seem to have changed a bit.
The committee has. It's particularly nice to see some, I think, brownies. Yes, give us a wave if you're a brownie. Jolly good. Thanks. I hope you found it interesting what we've got to do this evening. First, apologies. Have we any apologies? Councillor West.
Councillor Rawson, Chair.
That's just the one then. Any late items to be introduced by me? Just to let everybody know that the Agard Street application has been withdrawn from this agenda. It will be, all being well, on the next agenda, and that is for legal reasons, after legal advice. So if anybody is here in the gallery particularly concerned with the Agard Street development, sorry, but it's not this evening. Any other late items? Good, thank you. Anybody, any declarations of interest? Take that as a no. Can we take the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of April? Thank you. And the minutes of the Conservation Area Advisory Committee held on the 8th of March. Thank you. That brings us to appeal decisions. Incidentally, poor Clark is still off sick. He's been ill for some time now. So I'm sure you'd like us to pass on your good wishes to him. So Sarah's here to deal with the appeals. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two appeal decisions to let you know about this evening. First one's for 60 Field Rise. Appeal was dismissed. This was against imposition of two planning conditions attached to a permission granted for amendments to a side and rear extension to a dwelling. and detached garage, and it was in respect to conditions 2 and 4, which related to a large balcony extension on the rear of the house, and conditions were imposed to protect the privacy of the adjacent neighbours. Both conditions required the balcony, balustrade and parapet walls to be built in accordance with those approved plans before being brought into use. The appellant wanted to build the balcony differently from that shown on these approved plans, but he didn't provide any plans in support of his appeal. So the inspector felt he couldn't really consider any amendments in the absence of plans, so he felt the conditions were reasonable, protected the privacy of neighbours and should be retained in their original form. Second appeal is a new dwelling, the land of rear of 43 Grasmere Crescent in Sinfin. This appeal was allowed. It was allowed on design grounds, and we felt that it was an unacceptable form of backland development, which was out of keeping with the street scene, but in this case the inspector didn't agree. It was an outline application with all matters reserved for a bungalow, and the inspector didn't agree that it would be an unsatisfactory form of isolated backland development. He felt it would not be particularly prominent or intrusive in the street scene, and he noted the degree of modest change in the character of the area is inevitable and acceptable, so he allowed the appeal. That's the end of the appeals.
Thank you. Anybody, any questions about that? Thank you. Move then to item 7, which is the Development Control Performance Report for the first quarter of this calendar year. Sarah again is going to introduce that to us.
I've got nothing to add to the report, but I am happy to take any questions on that report.
Anybody, any questions on it? I think it's an interesting report that shows quite clearly that our performance in the city here is pretty good. When you look at the government target of 70% in 8 weeks for non-major applications, and we get through 93%. And the major applications, the government target is 60%, and in Derby we achieve 100%. So I think the staff concerned are to be congratulated. Item 8 then is applications to be considered. The first one, for which there are a number of members of the public present, is the outline planning application for land to the south of St Edmund's Parish Church, Sinfin Avenue, Allington, with access from Queensferry Gardens. And Mr Bate, who's going to speak to the committee for the first time, Mr Stephen Bate is going to introduce this one to us.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, as you outlined, this is an outline application for the demolition of the Baden-Powell hut and the erection of 6 dwellings on land to the south of St Edmund's Church. I'll just run through the slides. The red line that you can see on the current slide shows the application site. The church obviously to the north of the site. The large building which you can see on there is the existing Baden-Powell hut. Buildings to the south are houses on Queensferry Gardens. The application is in outline and all matters are reserved at the present time, so if members approve it tonight, there'll have to be a further application for the reserved matters at a later stage. There has been an illustrative plan submitted. There we go. The illustrative plan shows a layout with 6 houses orientated north to south. There we go, north to south on the site, with an access road and a turning head. The access coming off Queensferry Gardens. And although it's not part of the current application and not within the red line, the illustrative plan does show a proposed extension to the church. The submitted supporting statement sets out the church's position in respect to this matter and the need to maximise their particular assets, which they believe can be achieved by the phased development of the site. All those financial and supporting matters are included in the report. The site itself comprises the south part of the church grounds, part of the vicarage gardens, and land associated with the Baden-Powell hut, all within with the ownership of the church. The hut at the moment is leased from the church. The site is surrounded by other residential uses. You see from the slides, these are primarily showing the rear of the church with the hut. The slide in the bottom right is looking back towards the church, and the slide bottom left shows some of the unused open land to the rear of the church. I think we've got one more slide which shows, this is where the proposed access is coming, adjoining the first house that you come to in Queensferry Gardens. So as I was saying, that the site is surrounded by other residential uses. There is an area of public open space to the southeast, and to the immediate west of the site, on the corner of Queensferry Gardens, is the Crown and Arrows Public House. So turning to the application itself, there have been a significant number of representations to the proposal. These include 143 objections and a petition of nearly 5,000 signatures. The objections are primarily concerned the loss of the Baden-Powell hut, and the consequential loss of that leading to the loss of a significant community facility. There are also concerns expressed at the adequacy of the alternative community facilities that are being proposed by the church. Full details of the petition and the church's response to that are highlighted in the report. Turning to the consultation responses to the application, they include comments from our own planning policy colleagues, who highlight the conflict of policies in the core strategy between both providing new housing but also protecting community facilities and green infrastructure. Our highways officers themselves raised no objections. Subject to the imposition of conditions, they're satisfied that an access can be achieved in the position shown off Queensferry Gardens. The Derbyshire Wildlife Trust have submitted a late response to the application. This is because a bat survey was carried out very recently, and they don't raise any particular objections to the application, but they do suggest that further survey work is carried out regarding trees on site and whether they can support roosting bats. So, Chairman, what I would suggest is if members approve the application tonight, that an extra condition is added to ensure that that extra survey work is carried out. So looking at the key issues in the consideration of the application, these are primarily, and most importantly, the balancing exercise in providing new housing to maintain the Council's 5-year housing supply against the potential loss of a community facility and any adverse impact on the existing green infrastructure. The loss of the Baden-Powell hut has raised much emotive consideration, and the independence of the Baden-Powell organisations and the social history of the hut unfortunately carry little weight in the planning balance. There is a need to provide fully inclusive community facilities, and officers believe that this could be achieved by the church's proposed extension. And although this is not included as part of the application, it could be achieved by way of a Grampian-style negative condition, and that is listed within the suggested conditions in the recommendations. So regarding other issues, firstly, for green infrastructure, it's considered that the site has minimal green value and that the proposed mitigation and improvement measures which have been set out by the church carry some weight. In terms of the residential development, although the site is not allocated in the core strategy, it is located within a good sustainable area, and it is considered it would contribute to the city's housing growth. There are no highways objections to the principle of the development, and detailed matters of layout and design would be subject to consideration of a subsequent reserve matters application. With respect to ecology issues, as I mentioned, a bat survey has recently been undertaken, and that concludes that the proposal, including the demolition of the hut, would have no potential impact on bats. So in conclusion, it's considered that the proposed housing growth would outweigh any loss of green space. The loss of the Baden-Powell hut would be compensated by the provision of an alternative community facility, and this would be controlled by an appropriate condition. So the recommendation is to grant subject to conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to confess my ignorance. I don't know what a Grampian-style condition is. Does anybody else? A Grampian-style condition? In which case, can somebody explain it? Perhaps our legal advisor, Stephen Teasdale, will.
Yes, it's basically what is termed as a negative condition. It's basically saying that you will not be able to start development until you've done certain things. So it's a negative condition requiring certain things to be put in place before development is allowed. Or it could actually be before occupation. It varies on different, but it's, as I say, a negative condition.
Thank you. And we have some speakers for the developer. Mr. Milner, if you would like to come and take a place. And like everybody, you have 3 minutes.
Chair, members of the committee, communities throughout the country are seeing churches closing at the rate of almost 3 a month, a rate that has been steadily increasing over the last 15 years. All the predictions are that this closure rate will not only continue, but will increase. There can be few parishes that are not working hard to prevent these closures, and St Edmund's PCC is no exception and has risen to the challenge to try to create a viable, sustainable future for the church. To achieve this, the facilities within the church need to be modernised and extended to enable the wider community user groups to take advantage of enhanced and attractive facilities. It was built as a church at a time when there were full congregations and no one considered providing toilets or other facilities. If the church is to avoid redundancy, it has to align with today's needs and requirements and become a multi-purpose facility. In many ways, this application is effectively an enabling application, for in granting consent of the proposal before you, funds become available to enable St Edmunds to thrive and succeed deep into the future. Your office's report confirms that the application meets the test of all relevant national and local planning policies and is recommended for approval. The report quite fairly places focus on the views of the Baden-Powell groups that currently and exclusively use the wooden hut. Although the development will result in BP losing that exclusive use, the PCC have confirmed that within the new facility they will be made very welcome. The new facility will fully take into account the needs of BP groups both within the proposed extension to St Edmund's Church and the remaining external curtilage. The BP will not lose their hut until the new facility is complete and available for reuse. The PCC have worked extremely hard to find a solution that works not just for a single user group, but the wider community. Sadly, in a communication issued to the PCC, the BP has confirmed, and I quote, "The group feel very strongly that they do not want to be part of St Edmund's Community Hall project." The PCC respect that, but at the same time, as trustees and guardians of the church and its assets, it has to have regard for the bigger picture. And that means finding the way and the means of creating a sustainable future and working with the whole community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Milner. And on behalf of the objectors, there's a Mrs. Baker and a Mr. Joseph. Whichever one of you wants to go first, please move forward. And again, I remind you it's 3 minutes.
Greetings, my name is Richard Joseph of Auckland, New Zealand, and I have a 42-year association with the Scout Group, starting as a Scout, Venture Scout, and I was project manager for the construction of the extension to the hut. We own the hut, we do not lease it. That information is incorrect. The application is wholly in contradiction of the Council's planning controls to maintain existing proven functional facilities within our communities that safeguard the maintenance of sustainable communities for current and future generations. These controls set standards that are to be provided and maintained for everyone, but with a focus on young people to enable them to reach their full potential as members of society in our community. Page 5 of the report in front of you is where the critical planning issues start to be listed, and I quote from the report, "I consider the application does not comply with the policy CP21 criterion A. Our latest AMR indicates we have a 5-year housing supply, therefore it would be difficult to conclude that the benefit of providing 6 dwellings outweighs the harm on the GI network. Also in your report, in conclusion, the cumulative effect of the loss of a well-used community facility without any detailed proposals for a replacement and the harmful effect on part of the city's GI network leads me to conclude that there is a conflict with the policies of Derby City Council." That's in your document, sirs. Other sections of Local Plan 1 are mentioned briefly in the report, but their contents are very pertinent. That's public open space. It will be the material consideration for planning applications which involve the loss of public space, and CP21, community facilities. Local Plan Review 2006 Policy L6 states that planning permission will not be granted for development which would involve the loss of previously or currently used land. Time's rolling on. The reason this application is there is because the church's own application says they have to sell assets to survive, as the gentleman's just said. We have put forward an alternative funding model to work with the national level of the church, the Scout and Guide associations, and we need the time to make that work. As our new council and councillors, we ask you to honour these precedents and policies by rejecting the application. We will continue our 50-year relationship
Thank
with
you,
the
Mr.
church.
Joseph. I have
Thank you.
to ask you to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Baker. Can I ask you to press the button so the red light comes on? That way it gets on the recording. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. This BP Hut is the only remaining community facility for children and volunteer groups in the area, as the War Memorial Hall in Allington was lost when the church sold that off for housing many years ago. That hall was used by a widely ranged community groups, including BP organisations. The church is now wants to sell the last remaining community facility as well. The BP Hut has provided a meeting place for children from wide-ranging social-economic circumstances, from Allington through to Chellaston. Under this application, this meeting and mixing of children will cease, and that will harm their long-term development as members of an inclusive and collaborative community. Under the section Planning Implementation of your own Derby City Council PPG 17 study, the executive summary, point 1.13, states, "It will be a material consideration for planning applications which involve the loss and or creation of open space, sports and recreation facilities, as well as for any major housing developments." This proposed housing development is small in scale and counts little towards a housing shortage, but it is a major consequential community loss. It does take away a secure green open space where children can safely learn life development skills in a safe environment, and take away an all-weather facility that is used for sports and recreation for young people of all ages and all backgrounds. The same council guidelines state that the facilities should be available within 480 metres, equivalent to a 10-minute walk. Our children already walk about 30 minutes or more to this facility. If this facility is taken away, how far will they have to walk to find an alternative? I wonder if the council could let us know that one. The loss of Moorways facility has also denuded our community and of resource, and if this application is approved, you will remove the final facility that is allowing children to expend their energy in a positive and creative form. The loss of BP will increase the risk of social costs within our communities by children hanging around on streets, using their energies in antisocial behaviour and vandalism and other things like that, which could harm our communities both short-term and long. In closing, thank you for taking into account the long-term harm of closing this secure facility that does not have a guaranteed equivalent in the proposed application. There is no detailed costings to validate the church's ambitions. Thank you on behalf of the children, parents and community leaders.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker.
Thank you.
The officers like to come back on any of the points raised.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just one point to make, really, to clarify how officers have considered this particular matter. As has been raised by the objectors, that there are clearly policies which seek to maintain and retain community facilities, similarly with green infrastructure. But officers have taken a balanced consideration here in terms of the housing growth that would be allowed by the development, and also the compensatory measures that would be included by the extension, the proposed extension to the church, which, as I said in my earlier statement, they can be quite clearly conditioned and controlled by any approval. So in taking that balanced approach, we felt that the application was acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members of the committee. Councillor Pegg.
Thank you, Chair. Having dealt with churches in Mackworth over our community facilities, I know, understand where everyone's coming from. It is extremely difficult, in every aspect of it. But I do have reservations with regards to this plan, especially if it's taking away a facility for the young people. It's so difficult to get these buildings up and running, and especially if you're using a church building for at a later date for your meetings and so on and so forth. There's always criteria that they will not allow you to use the building for. And having been a scouter and everything else, there is a lot goes off within there that I know the churches would not allow them to put the various things and that up. And I do have major concerns over that. At the moment, I'm not in favour of it, and I would like to see definitely, although it's outlined, I would definitely like to see legislation has put some criteria on it that says until the building's been agreed with the scouts and everybody else that it wouldn't go ahead. I do have great reservations over it overall, and I'm looking at the massive land next to the vicarage that maybe Scout Hut could be built there. I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
I must draw your attention to condition 12 on page 12. That is what I understand as being the Grampian condition. No development shall be commenced until details of the phasing of the proposed works, including construction of dwellings and the extension to the church, the provision of accessible community open space, and the demolition of the existing Baden-Powell hut have been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The construction works shall thereafter be carried out wholly in accordance with the phasing details. The BP hut shall not be demolished or removed from the site until the church extension or some other alternative community facility and accessible community open space has been implemented and is made available for use. I read that in full because I think it answers some of the points.
It answers a lot of the questions.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Really, my comments are similar. I noticed from the plan that the existing hut, there's a lot of outdoor space around it that's no doubt used in the better weather for tents and so on. Now, the new hut, it might be of similar size, but the space around it looks very restricted. I mean, if the vicarage was to give up its garden, that might be some sort of compromise, but really, I don't see how they can replace the open space on that site without something like that. Thank you.
Councillor West.
Thank you, Chair. I think you somewhat took the wind out of my sails reading Condition 12 in full. I was going to say, I obviously appreciate that the funding issues that the church and many other churches across the country are facing. And it is a shame that a much loved and well-used facility would have to be removed if this permission is granted. But I am encouraged, particularly by Condition 12, and also by the fact that this is outline planning permission, in that a new facility could be constructed that more members of the community can use. It does seem to be, as Stephen said, a highly emotive issue, obviously, but I also think that the petition that people signed doesn't quite tally with the rest of the paperwork. I'm largely in favour of this outline planning permission, but absolutely, imperatively with Condition 12 and also the Condition 13 of the further survey suggested by Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. I share considerable concerns regarding this. I actually visited and looked at the area concerned. This is a substantial building. I understand that they've had the facility for a very, very long time. 50 years has been mentioned. I can't say that I know that, but it certainly is and has been improved considerably over the years at great expense to either the Scout movement or the people that run that facility. I personally feel that there's a lot of children in that area, and the facility is one that unfortunately is not anywhere in the area at all. In fact, it's been said that it goes as far as Chaddisden with people going to that particular community. I personally feel that normally churches do fundraising of their own accord. In fact, churches are probably the biggest landowners in the country, and I'm sure they could find means themselves to raise money, which unfortunately may well be far better than doing away with a facility that's badly needed in that area. I do feel that there is very close to that, there's very little land that can be used, although I noticed when I went there was a small recreation ground at the end of Fairway Gardens, and quite honestly, other than that, there's no facility, it's all built in. I personally am against this completely and utterly, and I shall be voting against it.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Frank has just said. That area is badly in need of facilities like this because there is very little for children to do there. And I think the church, as one of the speakers said, they're willing to sort of come to an agreement with the church financially, and I don't see why they haven't explored that possibility. I know for us it's not a material consideration as to how they sort of come about, but I think that they should be more sort of accommodating towards the local residents, because after all, I mean, it is a facility that if it's gone, will not be brought back anywhere else, and those children that use it will probably end up on street corners, playing football or whatever, and damaging cars and, getting into trouble. So I honestly feel that this is something that shouldn't be taken away from this community, and the church should sit with the people who are running this, and if it's a matter of finance, they should try and sort it out, as the gentleman said earlier on, that they're willing to enter into some kind of financial agreement with them. But this is a facility that's much needed in the area.
Councillor Pegg.
Yeah, if I may just come back on one thing, Chair. I don't know if it's in our remit or anything to know this, but churches have been gifted a lot of land, and there's lots of covenants that go with this land. And I'm just wondering, have we explored that? If it's in our remit, if it isn't, to allow it, I'm not sure, Chair.
I'm going to ask Stephen to advise on that.
No, in simple terms, it wouldn't be relevant for the your consideration tonight. Whether it's been explored is not something that I'm aware of, but in terms of the matter you're dealing with tonight, it's not relevant.
Councillor Hassel, and then Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. It's unusual that we've got a building that's actually well used here, especially within a community. Community centres have been out of favour for a little while and get less used and used and used. But here we've actually got a facility that's being used and being used well. And actually I think it's a duty upon us all to try and cherish the fact that we've actually got children here who are learning, playing, being educated, and actually not sat at home on PlayStations and such like. I know that's not a material consideration, but actually it's something that we should bear in mind. As regards for the proposal from the church to the alternative, it pales in significance to what's already there. It's a smaller building, smaller land surrounding it, and I don't think it's suitable for the needs of the children and groups that currently use the current building. I'm not in favour of this application at all, and I'll be voting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor McChrystal.
So clearly an emotive one, but I feel the officer's report's very, very well balanced. I think it's worth noting, just reiterating 8.3.12 that you've already highlighted, Chair, that whichever way you vote, if we were to vote and to pass this, there's a very, very natural and very clear break on any change that would actually be happening on that piece of land. So regarding this application this evening, I've got no real concerns, because as long as 8.3.12 is enforced and it's made very clear that no change of use to the land can take place until an additional application is submitted, I'm not overly concerned regarding this application at this point.
Councillor Froggatt.
Councillor Weston, Councillor McChrystal, following on from clause 12 and on, I've lost it again. Keep going.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, we did look, yeah. And on page 4, on the concerns that the representations about the adequacy of the proposed new premises, it follows on that the extension will have to be built in storage for BP equipment, blah, 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 and more or less cater for what it does now. So this is an outline application, and I, for one, I am going to support it.
Thank you. I think it's important that we read the whole report, because, yes, emotive issues can cloud our thinking, as does ownership of the land. It's absolutely nothing to do with a planning application. Our decision is whether or not that land is suitable to have houses on it. That's basically what we have to decide this evening. Equally, finance has nothing to do with us. If this were granted this evening, there's no reason why the church and the BP organisations can't come to a mutual agreement after this, and I very much hope they would. But what we can't do is put sentiment before sensible law. The recommendation is to grant outline planning permission with all those conditions 1 to 12, plus the recommended one on BATS 13. Can I have those in favour of that recommendation? Please show.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You got me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, Chair.
That's 4. Those against?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 against.
So that is lost. That means that the recommendation is not carried. At this point, we've neither granted nor refused permission. What we need to do is regularise that by somebody putting forward a proposition, please?
Chair, together with reasons.
Precisely, yeah. Would somebody, one of those of you who oppose the recommendation, recommend something? What I'm asking is, will somebody propose that permission be refused?
Chair, I will propose that permission is refused. Sorry, I thought you wanted slightly more than that, and I'm just making some notes to come back.
Reasons, yeah.
Okay. Well, on the grounds that the facilities that are proposed wouldn't match the current facilities that are available to the service users of the current building.
Well, that whole water.
Chair, I assume you're basically saying the loss of community facilities and the loss of green space, which is contrary.
Loss of the green space and yeah,
policy,
yeah.
Sort of C20, I think it was. Or was it? Okay. Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is that motion seconded? Thank you. Councillor Harwood to second.
I'd like to just add that the significant reason, as far as I'm concerned, is the loss of a building for a certain purpose. No way would I see anybody having the chance to dictate what the Scouts Association should do, and that's my fear. And they're going to lose a purpose-built building for the Scouts, and that's important.
Thank you. So the motion to refuse planning consent is proposed and seconded. Those in favour of refusing, please show.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Those against refusal. 1, 2, 3. So permission is refused on the grounds of loss of green space and community facilities. Because that was against the recommendation of the officers, should there be an appeal to the Secretary of State, we would need a member of the committee to represent this committee at that appeal. Can I have a volunteer, please? Councillor Pegg has volunteered. Everybody happy with Councillor Pegg doing it? Thank you. We'll move on. And thank you all for your attendance on that one. Do we have a Mr. Dickey arrived?
Yes.
You have. Okay, well, keep your seat for now. I just wanted to check that you were here before we moved on, otherwise I'd have changed the order of where we were. The next application is a reserved matters application for land at the side and rear of The Hill, 402 Duffield Road, and Aaron Knight's going to introduce that to us.
Thank you, Chair. This application before committee relates to land to the side and rear of 402 Duffield Road, situated on the east side of Duffield Road, close to the A38 roundabout junction. The site lies within the World Heritage Site buffer zone. It's a mature garden setting containing mature trees and extensive landscaped areas. The application site also contains trees protected by a tree preservation order. The order covers a group of 8 lime trees either side of the access along Duffield Road. Another linear group of mixed species trees occupy a central section along the northern boundary of the site, within the curtilage of number 404. Along the eastern boundary toward the northern corner is a linear group of 8 lime trees. This application seeks permission for reserved matters of layout, appearance, landscaping and scale for 4 detached dwellings. Previously, under an outline application granted in 2016 by Planning Committee, means of access was approved together with the principle of residential development in this location. The proposed layout of 4 dwellings would be arranged around a new private access drive, with the houses orientated to face the interior of the site, and plots 2, 3 and 4 containing detached double garages. The dwellings are all 2-storey in scale. I draw members' attention to the relevant planning history of the site, which can be read on page 16 of your report. A total of 22 objections have been received. The main points are listed on page 17 of your report. Of the consultees, there are no objections from Highways, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, the tree officer or conservation officer. The key material planning issues are detailed in section 7 of your report. To summarise, these are as follows. In policy terms, the principle of residential development here has already been accepted under the previous consent and is considered suitable for residential development. With regard to the reserved matters of appearance, scale, layout and landscaping, the dwellings would individually designed house types of high quality composition and architectural appearance. The two-storey scale and low density form would be appropriate in this residential context. The orientation and layout of the dwellings is satisfactory, with principal elevations facing the interior of the site and good spacing between each of the 4 plots. Due to the secluded physical setting of the development site, the mature tree coverage and distance of dwellings from Duffield Road, the visual amenity impacts upon the character of the area, including the Duffield Road street frontage, is considered limited. As for landscaping, there is existing hedging and mature trees to the site perimeters. In highway terms, as previously indicated, the proposal shows no deviation from the approved plan, with the position, width and geometry of the access road as secured under the 2016 outline permission. The access to the site would utilise the existing drive access which currently serves 402. A good level of off-street parking provision is given for each of the 4 plots. The access point is acceptable with the road width and visibility displays shown, and the traffic generation upon Duffield Road and the network would be minimal given the number of units. With regard to the impact of the scheme on amenities of neighbouring residents, the immediate surrounding dwellings likely to be affected are numbers 398 and 404 Duffield Road, number 18A Church Lane and 8 Friars Close. It is considered that sufficient levels of privacy and amenity upon the neighbouring dwellings could be achieved due to the layout distances and window arrangements and extent of tree coverage along the site boundaries. The submission includes a recently updated tree implications assessment that identifies both protected and non-protected trees and confirms the tree measurements, positions and species and tree conditions. To facilitate the proposed development, a number of non-protected, ornamental and some B and C category trees are shown for removal. While cumulatively these trees contribute to the mature setting of the site, due to their unprotected status, no objection is raised to their removal. In the submitted tree report, trees 24 to 31 along the eastern boundary are identified for pruning works to their height and spread. These works are supported by the tree officer, subject to adherence to condition 4 as listed in the committee report. With one exception, all TPO trees are to be retained. The exception is tree 78, a lime tree which is adjacent to the access drive, and its removal is required to achieve a sufficient width and alignment of access road. It could be justified to achieve a suitable access and subject to a replacement tree condition. The updated site plan, revision D, shows that plots 1, 2 and 3 would not encroach upon the canopy spread or root protection area of those retained protected trees along the northern and eastern boundaries. The tree officer raises no objections. Finally, a preliminary habitat ecology survey is submitted, and Derbyshire Wildlife Trust do not raise objection on ecology grounds. On balance, the application would deliver a small-scale, low-density, well-designed infill residential development. It's in a sustainable location, and it is considered the scheme complies with local and national planning policy. A recommendation is given to grant planning permission with conditions. Chair, there are 2 speakers to address committee.
Thank you. Mr. Jenkin, on behalf of the applicant, would you like to come forward? Again, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak tonight. Obviously, I welcome the officer's report and its recommendation for approval. The officer's report is comprehensive and sets out the key planning issues, which are that the scheme does comply with your planning policies, it is suitable in design, the impact on neighbours is fully considered, the impact on highways has been fully considered, and the effect on trees and ecology is also a matter that has been given detailed consideration. The principle of building 4 new dwellings on this site has already been agreed, and there is an extant outline approval for 4 dwellings, which was granted in April 2016. The proposed residential use is within an established residential area. The officer's report acknowledges that this is a secluded site, which, if developed as proposed, will not be visible or affect the character or appearance of the World Heritage Site. The scheme will be largely screened from Duffield Road. The house designs are traditional and appropriate in this residential context. The officer's report states that it is a suitable form of residential development in this sustainable location, which will be in keeping with the character and urban grain of the surrounding area, in line with the design criteria in SAVE policies H13 and adopted policies CP3 and CP4. The means of access was approved at the outline stage. The access will be safe and there are no objections from the Council's highway team. The level of car parking is well above the minimum parking standard, and the development will not create any overflow or parking issues elsewhere. The scheme has been very carefully designed to minimise the impact on neighbouring residents. The relationship between the new homes and the neighbours is considered in detail in the officer's report. The report concludes that the relationships created by the development are acceptable and that the amenities currently enjoyed by neighbouring residents will be protected. The 4 plots are a good size, future residents will have ample amenity space, and there is a good relationship between the new dwellings and 402 Duffield Road. Only parts of the private garden spaces will be shadowed by trees, but the effect will not be unduly dominating. The trees are a significant consideration. The applicant has provided a thorough and detailed arboricultural impact assessment. The final layout and design of the houses has had full regard to the assessment, and the Council's tree officer has raised no objections. Objectives have made much about the impact on trees, but the applicant has provided a robust report that sets out clear and unambiguous methods for the protection of these trees. The mature character of the site and its boundary trees will be retained, and the impact on neighbours who benefit from these trees will be fully protected. The applicant has no objections to the proposed conditions, including the retention of the southern boundary hedge. There are strong and cogent reasons why the application should be approved, and I commend the scheme to the committee tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Dickey, would you like to come forward on behalf of the public speakers? Again, it's 3 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, nothing substantive has changed in respect of our objections by the provision of the new tree report that's been filed in this matter. The issue we're concerned with is whether Plot 2 is going to result in damage to the 8 protected lime trees on the eastern boundary with 18A Church Lane. Previously, the council tree officer was concerned about trying to squeeze 4 plots onto the site. His pre-application advice was that due to the juxtaposition of the plots with the lime trees, the site was only suitable for 3 plots. Despite this advice, the applicant is proceeding with 4 plots, with Plot 2 being right next to the protected lime trees. The application was originally supported by the report of Canopy Tree Services, dated 29th of June 2015, but this lacked critical details. Objections were filed concerning the potential damage to the trees and the lack of information, and a new tree report has now been filed. Now, this provides the technical missing information. However, the new report and addresses the failings of the original report, but this report should not satisfy the committee as to the substantive issue, which is the damaging juxtaposition of Plot 2 with the protected lime trees. The reason for this is quite simply because the new report makes clear that the lime trees now have to make way for the proposed house on Plot 2. In particular, it admits that in order to make way for Plot 2, the limes have to be topped by 4 metres in length and width by up to 8 metres. In other words, reduced in height by a third and halved in width. I would remind the committee of the purpose of TPO 526, which was that it was made on the grounds of the protection of the interests of visual public amenity. The trees are situated in prominent positions and can be appreciated from the immediate vicinity as well as further afield, and they contribute materially to the amenities of the locality by playing an important part in providing a sense of scale and maturity, and by having a general greening effect on the immediate and surrounding area. Mr. Chairman, the point is that topping and reducing the trees would be completely contrary to the TPO, as it would be lopsided and much less prominent, breaching the purposes of the order. If they're lost, the public amenity is removed and the whole point of the protection is lost. Mr. Chair, I'm conscious of time, and I have provided you with a written copy of my submissions, but in brief, it's suggested by the report to the committee that Plot 2 should be built and the issue of the TPO and the protection of the trees dealt with separately at a later date. I've given the committee and the councillors two reasons why that's not a procedural correct way of proceeding. There's issue of not taking into account a reasonable issue and fettering the council's discretion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. Mr. Knight, anything you'd like to come back on?
Thank you, Chair. I can assure you that the tree officer and myself have undertaken a site visit some months ago, and we were at the site for a considerable period of time. He has assessed the trees both on site and taken measurements and carried out his arboricultural assessment, as well as reviewed the documentation submitted to accompany the application. Whilst we have no tree officer present, from the information provided, it's quite clear that there's no objection from the arboricultural officer on the issue of the juxtaposition of Plot 2 to the protected lime trees along the eastern boundary toward the top northern end of the site. The zone of the root protection area and the canopy spread, as it is currently, the side of Plot 2 would be away from, close to it, but not within it. And for that reason, there are no objections from the tree officer.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I know this area quite well. I've read through some of the objections and I can see why there's concerns about land drainage issues. I just wondered if the officers have considered that at all.
It's covered by the conditions, but Mr. Knight can perhaps elucidate.
The site is within flood zone 1 as identified on Environment Agency flood maps. So low risk from fluvial flooding sources. Land drainage previously commented on the outline application that provided that the increased surface water flood risk is not increased. There's no objection, subject to the introduction of sustainable drainage measures. So, subject to condition, there was no objection from land drainage and no known localised flooding issues.
Thank you. There is a bit of a clue in the title, The Hill. So it's at the top of a hill. If you can see, the bit you can see from the road, of course, is quite a steep incline to the front gate. Would remind you that this is reserve matters. In other words, the principle of development here is long been agreed. Also point out that the reference number is 0617, which means this came in a year ago, and there's been negotiations going on for 12 months to try and resolve these issues. So it is up to us this evening to either grant or refuse permission on the evidence we've heard. Anybody else wish to speak on this item? In which case, I'll move the recommendation that we grant planning permission with the conditions as set out in the report. Those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous? I'm not going to ask for anybody against. So permission is granted with the conditions as set out. Thank you. Which brings us then to Northcliffe House, or former Northcliffe House in Meadow Road. This is an application for full planning permission for change of use from a print works to a school. Simple as that. And who's going to talk to us about this? Sarah? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a revised application for change of use of Northcliffe House, the former Derby Telegraph offices on Meadow Lane in the city centre. Proposal is for use of part of the former newspaper print works at the southern end of the building as a faith school. The school would operate as a non-state funded Islamic secondary school for 11 to 18-year-old boys. A couple of updates for members which have been circulated. We've had further comments from the environmental health team received in relation to land contamination. They would require land contamination assessment and remediation to be completed on site and is secured by any planning conditions to be attached. We've also received a rebuttal flood risk statement submitted by the applicant last week, which essentially disagrees with the comments made by the Environment Agency and the Council's land drainage team. It does not include any further flood risk information to address the issues raised by these consultees, and our land drainage team have confirmed this afternoon that they don't have anything further to add to their previous comments. In terms of the main body of the report, the proposed use of the building as a secondary school will not involve any material changes to the appearance of the building. Use of the part of the former car park and turning area would be for the outdoor play area, cycle parking and parent drop-off, and it's the area shown, which is the area shown in green. Car parking for 38 vehicles is to be provided, and 44 cycle spaces in the area previously used for staff car parking. The site is adjacent to the River Derwent and the mainline railway line. It is identified in the adopted local plan as existing employment land and is covered by the defined Our City, Our River area for the delivery of flood management programme for the river and the city. It's on the edge of the city centre. It's a highly sustainable location in terms of its accessibility, and there are acknowledged benefits to the delivery of a new school in this relatively central location by provision of additional secondary school places. A previous application by the applicant for a school and nursery on this site, submitted in 2017, was refused on two grounds. Firstly, that there was high flood risk to the users of the development, and secondly, that traffic impacts on the highway network had not been properly assessed. The current application is supported by additional transport and flood risk information, which seeks to address those two reasons for refusal. Taking the highways issues first, the submitted transport assessment and travel plan for the school use have addressed the concerns of the highways officer, and they recommend permission subject to various conditions in relation to secure parking and drop-off and implementation of the travel plan. In terms of flood risk, the concerns raised under the previous scheme with regard to the vulnerability of the use and the lack of an adequate flood evacuation plan still remain. The revisions to the flood risk statement have not overcome the objections of the Environment Agency, the Council's land drainage team or the county's emergency planning officer. The proposed school is classified as a more vulnerable use for the purposes of addressing flood risk to the users of the development, and it increases the risk from a less vulnerable use, which covers the existing commercial use of the building and the permitted B8 distribution use, which occupies the northern part of the building. Permitted trampoline park and play centre uses, which were granted in 2016 and 2017, were also cast as less vulnerable uses, although these have not been implemented. Provision of a safe flood evacuation route in the event of flood has not been demonstrated by the applicant and would prove difficult due to the position of the site between the river and the railway line. Whilst the site would benefit from phase 2 of the Our City, Our River scheme, permission is in outline at this stage, and the timing and siting of future defences is not known at this time. The school would therefore not be protected by OCOR in the medium or short term, and the residual risk of flooding has not been adequately assessed within the flood risk assessment. These 3 flood risk issues were covered under the previous reason for refusal, are therefore still outstanding, and as such the proposed use remains contrary to Local Plan Policy CP2 and the MPF policies in relation to flood risk. The application has attracted 8 comments in support of the scheme and 2 in objection. In terms of other environmental impacts, noise and land contamination are considered to be suitable to be addressed by condition. So on balance, the benefits of a new school in this location are not considered to be outweighed by the substantial risk to public safety arising from potential flooding. Accordingly, it's recommended that the proposal is refused on flood risk grounds. You have 2 speakers.
Thank you. Mr. Musa, on behalf of the applicant, would you like to come forward? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to speak on behalf of this application. The Al-Khair Foundation is a UK-based international NGO providing humanitarian support, international development, emergency aid and disaster relief in some of the world's most deprived areas. Established in 2003 and rapidly growing into one of the leading Muslim charities in the UK, Al-Khair Foundation also looks to tackle issues prevalent in the UK, such as unemployment, education, women's empowerment and domestic violence. Al-Khair's first school opened on the 7th of July 2003 in Croydon and began its journey with 5 pupils. In over 10 years, the school has evolved into a fully fledged primary and secondary school with over 400 pupils. Al-Khair is proud to say that it's currently succeeding in its vision of becoming one of the best schools in London. Now, in relation to the application, as you're probably aware, the first application which was refused was for a primary school, a nursery and a secondary school. We had sort of issues with the highways, the noise and the flood risk. The highways and noise have been addressed and the council are happy with those, and the flood risk aspect of it still remains. Now, we've had extensive pre-application discussions with the council and Our City, Our River team and the land drainage team and the environmental team, after which we were quite positive after the recommendation of only allowing for a secondary school to be used on this site, which is why we are pretty dumbfounded as to why this application has been refused. As you're probably aware, with the information provided to you, a trampoline park and a family entertainment centre has been approved for this site previously. Where was the flood risk issue at that time? A flood risk assessment was submitted and accepted by the council at that time when children from the age of 8 months up till 18, 19, 20 would be allowed onto the site, and this was in their design access statement. And the flood risk assessment was accepted at that time. We've worked with the council for this application, and we're just struggling to come to sort of terms as to why a school and the benefits of the school, why this would be rejected. The flood risk assessment of the previous scheme was accepted, and the strategy for this one was actually an improvement from the previous application. The hazard rating for the site has not changed since the previously consented applications for the D2 uses. Also, there are precedents within that same area, flood risk 3 of the Lando Forte College and the proposed cathedral school. So we are struggling to think, is this because this is a Muslim faith school, it's being refused by the council. Overall, it is considered that the social and economic benefits of the proposed development outweigh the minimum residual flood risk, 1 in 100 years, and in accordance with the principles of sustainable development, it is respectfully requested that the planning permission be granted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Musa. I can assure you that the religion has absolutely nothing to do with our decision this evening. We are talking about use of the land and the safety of those who use it. We have also somebody to speak on this from a member of the public. Mr. Porter, would you like to come forward?
Councillors, Chairman, planning officials, thank you very much for having me here tonight to speak. In a way, I'm a little bit disappointed that I'm actually here speaking to you because, unfortunately, I was hoping that the applicant would actually contact me and we could talk our differences out and help each other with the application, but unfortunately that hasn't happened. Councillors, before you make your decision tonight, please can I ask you to read my letter of objection very carefully? And just to note the inadequate drop-off facilities for the children, the failure to submit engineering reports on the 2 bridges that are going to be used by a lot of children, the problems with the park safeguarding facilities, using the public park as playground areas. And also, big failures in the application. The failure to identify a farm at the end of the road, the failure to identify a public right-of-way, and the failure to identify that Bass's Wreck is used by fairs and circuses with heavy machinery, and when parents can't drop their kids off at the entrance, they'll drop them off at the side roads, and the children will be running across the fields and they could get seriously hurt or injured. I will like to say to the Council that my application is totally not to do with religion. Regardless of what faith, I would have objected to that site because I think it's too dangerous. I also need to bring to the Council the issue that in other schools in Derby, St Benedict's, Catholic School, West Park, I think it's Church of England over in Spondon, there's huge issues with public right-of-ways going through or up along the side of that school. So if you put a school there, you're going to create an issue in years to come. Just something to be aware of. The Chairman has spoken earlier on tonight about conciliation in previous applications, and I'd like to take this opportunity to, through his representative, to say to His Excellency Imam Rashid, you know, that we are available for discussion to help each other, and that, you know, planning applications need not be adversarial. So communication is important. And in that spirit of conciliation, I would like to suggest to His Excellency, you know, there are better and safer sites available in Derby. You've got the Bates Weston building and the Compendium offices coming up shortly. You've also got the unused school site in Castleworth. And in my opinion, that would be a safer and better place to site a school. So in that spirit of conciliation, I'd like you to bring that back to His Excellency, if that's possible, for future applications, hypothetically speaking. So I'd just like to ask the councillors tonight, before they make the decision, to please read my letter of protest, and then hopefully my suggestions or my points will be a help to forming an opinion. Thank you, councillor, officials and councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Very good timing. Mrs. Claxton.
Oops. Just a bit of clarification for members in terms of this more vulnerable use and less vulnerable use. The previous uses which have been permitted on the site, as referred to, the trampoline park, play centre, and indeed the B8 unit, which is currently occupying part of the building, they're all classed as less vulnerable uses under the PPG National Planning Policy Guidance for flooding and coastal change. It's mainly because they are commercial uses, so there is a degree of commerciality within all those proposals, even though they obviously, two of those are used by children. School is classed as a more vulnerable use, and obviously for obvious reasons, children are left for long periods of time within uses where they may be more difficult to escape from. So that is the distinction, and the reason that those two previous uses have been permitted is mainly because they were classed as less vulnerable uses, whereas this is a more vulnerable use, so we feel the balance is weighed more against the proposal in terms of the risk, high risk of flooding, which has not adequately been addressed in our view.
Members of the committee, Councillor Pegg.
I'm beginning to get really worried now with these flood defences. We're spending millions of pounds and we're now being told that we could even get flooding now. It's supposed to be for 100 years to prevent flooding. And it is worrying when we're hearing officers telling us that we can't give planning permission in a certain area that's never flooded in 70, 80 odd years, that we cannot, it might be detrimental to put a building there. And the amount of money that we're spending on the additional flooding defences is a real worry to me. I personally don't think there would be a problem in that area with regards to flooding.
Thank you. Councillor West.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'm disappointed to hear the suggestion that permission may be refused due to this being a Muslim faith school. As you've already alluded, Chair, that has absolutely not a consideration of this committee. Secondly, and taking into account Councillor Pegg's comment, I think the key thing here is that the OCOR scheme has only or is still only undergoing phase 1 of the scheme. We have identified phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 2 would cover the land around Meadow Road and would potentially reduce this from a 1 in 25 year potential event to a 1 in 100 year. That flood defence scheme is not in place. The funding for that flood defence scheme is still not in place. We cannot, in all good conscience, approve a site for a school for a huge number of young people and their parents, guardians, teachers, associated staff in an area that could potentially flood. I'm completely in agreement with the sorry, I've lost my words. I'm completely in agreement with the recommendations of the officers, and I will be voting accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cowan.
Thank you, Chair. Having read this statement, or rather the notes from the officers a couple of times, I was a bit confused, and after hearing what Sarah has just described and what the gentleman has said, I'm even more confused. I'd just like some clarity on some of the statements put here. I mean, when was the last time this place was flooded? There was a mention that there were some sandbags called for in 2007, but were they used for any purpose? I mean, it's quite easy for a building of any kind to ask for sandbags, although the flooding might be in sandy acres. So, was there any flooding here? If so, how deep was the water? And why has this been put in here if it's not relevant to the application in terms of... There's been a lot of innuendo and ambiguity in this. I mean, for those of us, that have read it read it through comprehensively. I'm not clear as to what the reasons are. I mean, we were approving this for 18-month babies as a creche, a trampoline, a nursery, a school, but it seems to me that we think there's more risk for 11 to 18-year-olds than there was for 18 months old. As I said, just some we've got some notes that have come. This application's been before, it's been refused, and yet we're now asking for decontamination information. We should have been asked for 2 years ago, rather than to bring it on the night of the application being heard. Secondly, I mean, if obviously we all know that there is a need for a school here, and this is going to provide much needed schooling for children, because it will relieve some of the pressure that's on Derby Moor, Littleover, Bemrose, etc. There's a suggestion made that there was, or rather something written by the highways or officers, that a train going by, will affect the concentration of the children and the noise and what. Well, we've got a busy ring road going past Joseph Wright and Landau 40. We've got a dual carriageway going past Bemrose School. We've got a very busy road that goes past St. James's School. I don't know where this information is relevant. I mean, there's also that there may be some, altercation with cyclists going to the Bass Recreation Ground. How does that come into this? It seems to me that a mishmash of reasons has been thrown here, and not one really stands up to examination. Even the reports by the Environmental Agency have been, with the document that we've received tonight, and I read it when it was emailed to us earlier on. It just, it doesn't add up. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm the only one that's not clear on this, but I just can't see for the life of me how it was approved earlier, refused on different grounds, brought back for 11 to 18-year-olds, recommended for refusal again. A lot of the reasons have been taken care of. A lot of the reports that were written by environmental, I mean, there seem to be about 3 or 4 different agencies involved. We have granted permission for buildings to be put up all the way along here. Indeed, there's an application in Duke Street, which is far nearer to the river than this is. Are we saying that, these people will not notify their children or parents that, oh yes, we've got a flood warning? Are we saying it's going to be so sudden that they won't have time to prepare evacuation plan? Indeed, from what I read, their evacuation plan hasn't been taken into consideration. So, I think that in reality, they should go and sit down with these people, get all these issues sorted, and then come back to this committee, rather than asking us to make decisions here when there isn't any clarity. There isn't a valid reason, for them to be doing this when information is being passed to us at the last minute regarding some of the issues that have been addressed by the applicant. I honestly don't know, what's happening here. Why are there so many different sort of, scenarios being put here? Noise from trains, cyclists, traffic. I mean, this was a printing works with God knows how many people employed there. There were cars being driven there. Here we are having children that will use public transport to the city centre. From here to there is not a long walk. They will have parents dropping them off. There are buses dropping them off. How many schools do we know that have 38 parking spaces when there's only 200 pupils? I know of schools that have 1,000, sort of pupils and don't have this kind of parking space. I honestly don't know what's happening here and why there are so many ambiguous reasons for refusal.
As far as I can read on the report, there is only one reason for refusal, and that is that children will be in danger. And I think that is extremely important. You've asked for a valid reason. It has been explained both before the public speakers and after the public speakers that the categories for vulnerability would in this case go up from, what was it, mild to?
Less vulnerable.
Yes, less vulnerable to more vulnerable. So that has been clearly explained to us. Yes, there are a number of things written in this report because it's a very full report taking into account all the factors concerned. But the item 8 on page 76, and it ends, is that there is only one, there is no other as far as I can see, because it goes on to page 77 with the map, is to refuse planning permission for the following reasons, which are all about the floods. So I think it's quite clear.
Yes, Chair, that's fine, but I did ask, it's been put here, sandbags were asked for 2007. I want to know, was there a flood or wasn't there a flood? Just to put something like that in there, I don't think it should be put in there without proper evidence. So all I'm asking is, I want to know, was there a flood at that time? Were the sandbags used or were they simply just asked for in precaution?
Remember 2007 that clearly. It was 11 years ago, but I'm going to ask the officer to try. Do it through me.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't remember a flood in 2007 either. I'm afraid I can't confirm or deny whether there was a flood or when the last flood was. I can only quote the Environment Agency's comments that the site is likely to flood from events in a period of 1 to 50 and higher than 1 metre in design floods, which is a 1 in 100-year event. The depth and rapid velocity on site would result in danger for all, in according to the document quoted. So there is the depth and velocity of flood water that would arise in this particular site.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're absolutely right. There's only one reason why the recommendation has been made for refusal, and that's the flood risk. And as I read it, the flood risk assessment would enable us to make an even better judgment. And we've got here from Canham Consulting a rundown of what they feel is the flood risk, and I have a tendency to agree with them. Flood risk 1 in 100 to me makes it virtually that it's never going to happen. We can not say in life that nothing would ever happen, but there are times when we've got to make decisions which may or may not in the end prove wrong. But in this particular case, what gets me is, and I agree with Councillor Khan, that we've agreed, this planning committee, to other buildings in the area of flood risk. Take the recent flats that are very adjacent to the flood risk, I won't might happen, and we passed that, even though I was against it and what have you. The fact is this committee agreed to that, and there were other decisions taken where flood risk was probably even more evident than this particular one. The only thing that I was worried about here was not the flood risk as such, was the highway risk. But the highways are put in 4 conditions, which will mean that's okay. And the only other item, of course, is the one we've had tonight regarding the contamination of the land to what went on before this place became vacant. Personally myself, I'm in agreement with this, and I think he's absolutely right. It will enable us to take children away from schools that, to my mind, are overpopulated, and it could be a good thing that this building comes back into being, and if everybody is sensible, I can't see a problem at all.
Thank you. Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether anyone is qualified to answer this question, but obviously we're told there is a flood risk. Is that flood risk now increased due to the flood defences further down river and until upriver, down, yes, up obviously, and should flooding happen further upriver, would that therefore increase the likelihood of this area flooding should that event arise?
Is anybody able to answer that? But common sense does tell us that the land just south of here, beyond this building, is undeveloped and has been forever. There was at one time a gravel pit there, but that is undeveloped because it is floodplain. I know the river's got to come up a hell of a long way before it gets to there, but I would have thought all that's being spent on Orcor in Darley Ward and just here in the city centre, well, it's common sense, isn't it, that water will go to this area. We have been told that it's a danger for everybody concerned. Now, I cannot, in all consciousness, put my hand up to grant permission for something which the professional officers have told us is a danger to children. It seems ridiculous to try and do that. There is an appeal procedure and perhaps people can give different evidence, but trying to remember when there was last a flood and saying, oh, we've got no flood problem, well, tell me that when the alarm goes off, because that is the time we'll be conscious of this. And I'm old enough to remember Aberfan. There was a primary school there. Do you remember that, when that moved and all those children were killed? I know this is not really comparable, but I think we have a moral as well as a legal obligation to make a decision this evening in the interest of the safety of the children. Councillor McChrystal. Sorry, do you want to advise legally?
I was just going to come in on one point in relation to Frank raised the issue of the application at the previous committee, which was the Biohouse one. Now, as far as I understand, and Sarah probably would correct me, is that that application actually had, as part of it, took account of flooding in its design. With this building, or this proposal, doesn't. I think the second point I would say is that a risk in a 1 in 100 doesn't mean that it's going to happen in 100 years. It's just a proportionate risk. It could happen tomorrow. I mean, it could happen any day. And it's the way that the Environment Agency calculates the potential risk and whether flood defences are required. And as you know, the Our City, Our River scheme deems it appropriate to put in flood risk for this area to protect any development or to protect any buildings or uses. And certainly, you know, it's concerns of the Environment Agency, OCAR and your drainage people to allow development on this. The other point I'd sort of say is that you've already refused development for a school on this site for the very reason for flood risks. And the question, it's important to have a consistency in your planning decisions. And the question really is, you know, has there anything changed in terms of dealing with those concerns that you had at that time? So those points that I would put. I don't know if for the issues on Biohouse whether I was correct.
Thank you. Councillor Hassel.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't understand really the persistence to have a school on a site which is potentially dangerous. I understand what a 1 in 100 risk actually means, and certainly Boscastle in 2004 had a 1 in 100 risk chance of flooding, and well, cars were being with people and they were being washed out into the sea. And why do I know that? Well, I was there at the time and I saw it happen. So I couldn't all conscience vote to have school children at a site which has genuinely got, you know, a chance of flooding. I think it's dangerous, and I think there's far better locations throughout the city for the school.
Anybody else wish to speak on this application? The recommendation then is to refuse planning permission for the following reason, and that is listed on page 76. Those in favour of refusal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Chair.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, refusal is carried then, and we refuse planning permission on the, as stated in the report, for the reasons on page 76. Future potential site visits. We have a list at Appendix 2 of item 9. There are a number on there which are variations in conditions, and I never see the point of a site visit for a variation of a condition unless it's something that's been drawn to our attention and will make a huge difference. So I suggest we don't do that. The first one on there is Middleton House, full application. Now, I personally would like to go and visit there because we do own it, I think, still. It's a very interesting building, and I think in a conservation area we ought to go, and we ought to invite the members of CAC to come as well. Do you agree that we should have a site visit? Okay. Anybody against it? You don't have to come. Jolly good. Okay, so we'll make it, arrangements for a visit to Middleton House. I'm old enough to remember Charles Middleton, after whom it was named. Hackwood Farm is variation condition. Some members, long in the tooth, have been there. Yes, there's no much point in that. Castle Ward redevelopment. Please tell us a little bit about that.
This is a new outline within the area which is currently covered by the outline permission for the whole of the Castle Ward regeneration scheme, and it's for a standalone development of 180 apartments on the site of the current, which is NCP car park on Liversidge Street and some adjoining industrial units. So it's right in the middle of Castle Ward, but it is a new scheme from a new applicant.
Well, we can all go and look at that without having an organised visit, unless anybody particularly wants one. All we would be looking at is a bit of land. The rest of Castle Ward has worked extremely well, but there will be a lot of issues involved. As long as somebody doesn't say halfway through the meeting, I think we ought to go and have a look, because this is your chance to say you want to look now. Okay, we'll go and do it individually. Right. Homely Way, again, is a variation condition, and the further Castle Ward development one is variation condition to allow use of Unit 11 as a bridal shop. Well, I don't think a visit's worth going for that. Anybody disagree with me? Okay. Carsington House, which is Park Farm Centre. Now, this has already been the subject of a public meeting of residents. It's highly controversial. I think it's important that we at least go and look at it so that we make a more valued judgment on the evening when we do consider it. People in favour of going to Park Farm? No? Nobody? So you know all about it? Okay. All right. You can see it from the road, yeah, that's not a problem. Okay. But it is going to be a humdinger of one of those where the public have a say. All right, so all we have to arrange then is one to Middleton House in due course. Of course we have, yeah. Two more. Westcroft Avenue, we can go and look at that but for ourselves, I would have thought. It's erection of 2-storey buildings and 10 self-contained apartments. I think looking at the site we'll be able to and you can download a map of the plan. And the further one is a variation of condition. Anybody disagree with those proposals? In which case, thank you very much for your attendance. It's 7:30. Councillor Harwood said we would finish at 7:30, and we are. Thank you. Yeah. There's a sweet steak on it.
So who was Middleton?
Charles Middleton, he was Director of Education in the County Borough until it ceased to exist in 73-74. But in those days, the building of Beckett Street in Berlin was his office, the old Paula office, and it was a huge department with chauffeurs for the Chairman of Education.
I think I heard something about it.
Yeah.
Quite
Nice old boy. Yeah. He's long since dead. Yeah. God, yeah.
I'll go back in time, 60 years, and an application for a school.
Which one was that? Oh, yeah.
Planning committee, and there was a first windows looking over, it was condemned
But it was named after a complete rogue of an Alderman Sturgis.